We arrive when the sky is starless. Leave the car, walk over the bridge. Crossing the dark fleeing river below. Sentries meet us halfway like an exchange. It is always 3 a.m. at the border. The artificial yellow light, harsh on their uniform buttons and carbines, our pale winter breaths losing the shapes of our bodies. These are my papers, trust me. The photograph is me, though from a younger lifetime. This is my longest, warmest coat. It is what I have. My relation with the person next to me has nothing to do with the contents of my bags. I claim no nationality. I am this body that moves through similar geographies, from sovereign side to sovereign side. I cannot help but be a citizen of transience, always looking for the land beyond language. They escort me to a van and close the curtains, open the scuffed suitcase, open the toothpaste, smell the bottled water from Jordan, stand me up to undress. These adolescents believe their post is important. They are bribed by their own lessons of duty and don't consider what it is they protect. But I will not recognize it. I want to tell them, take the suitcase. It was my father's. In countries of the temporary, we are forever accumulating, possessing, leaving behind. In the end, our hands will be finally empty. Here is the gate your government wrought, leaving behind the blunt, obdurate coins that fall useless between night borders. Stubbornly ourselves to a state of undress, we transfer what is transferable. Enter the new country, chilled, fresh, farthingless. That is a poem called Passport, written by the Greek-American poet Nicholas Samaras, which was given to me recently by a very kind reader who's been sending me a lot of books, which I really need to take a year out just to read. What I like about this poetry collection, which is called Hands of the Saddle Maker, is the cover. I just love that cover. I'd love a book with a cover like that. So, why did I read that poem? I read that poem because it's about entering the new country with nothing. And that seems to be what I write about a lot now. And I wondered about whether I should make another little film like this. One of my incentives for doing that is that I just bought a new film camera. So I thought I'd better use it. I've even got a little microphone. Look, it's very exciting. It's all very professional. But, you know, does the world need any more content? Does the internet need any more men talking on videos? Does Substack need any more essays? When I was young, I really wanted to be a writer. I grew up in a household where my mum and dad both loved books, and my mum especially taught me to read very early. So they're really responsible for me reading and loving books. But they weren't writers or anything like that. My mum and dad didn't go to university, and I didn't come from the kind of background where you would ever meet anyone like a writer, or even anyone with a doctorate or anything like that. Those kind of people were up in the stratosphere for me. I came from an ordinary kind of little suburban house, and I read all these books, and writers to me were sort of mythical figures. And so I loved all the books I read, and I fantasized about the idea that one day I could write one. Of course, when you end up writing a book and publishing it, you realize writers are no more exciting than anyone else. But the point is that when I was young, back in the Stone Age, there wasn't so much content, and nobody called it content, right? Everybody couldn't just bang out a Substack or a blog or stick a video up. Now everyone's producing everything, then of course a lot of it has been rendered worthless, and a lot of it is worthless, including probably a lot of what I'm doing, maybe all of it. And you get to the point, and we've long passed this point actually in the digital age, where we're just flooded with crap, and a lot of that crap has words attached to it. And sometimes I think back to the dawn of writing as a technology. I've written a lot about technology, and how it's changed our relationship with the earth, changed our relationship with each other, with our own sense of self and being human. But writing is probably the ultimate technology. In fact, I wrote a whole book, ironically, wrote an entire book about the limits of writing and the dangers of it. It's a book called Savage Gods, and one of the things I looked into in that book, which was a kind of cry of pain from a writer who can't stop writing but can see what a wall writing puts up in a way. One of the things I looked into was the origins of writing. And the first words that are ever written down are accounts. They're literally lists from the early city-states in the Middle East of how many cows a farmer owns, how much gold a king's got, this kind of stuff. So words are things that we initially created to communicate with each other, to measure things, and to kind of measure the world, I suppose, to rationalize the world. You could argue that actually writing is the beginning of the machine mentality. Before we had writing, we had an oral culture where the stories had to be memorized. And our relationship with the world would have been different. So the coming of writing would have been as radical a change to our mindset as the coming of the internet has been, as the coming of the digital age has been, which in many ways is just an acceleration of the radical weirdness of relating through written words. Where am I really going with this? I think I'm talking about how alienating it is when we are just flooded with content, flooded with words, flooded with people talking, flooded with people writing. And I wonder how much of that is related to what I actually write about now, and have been writing about for years actually, which is people running away from the world. A lot of that recently has come through my writing about the wild saints, about Christian hermits, about the Orthodox tradition, particularly the Orthodox emphasis in Eastern Christianity on dying to the world, on dying to the passions, walking away. Now, you're not walking away in that tradition because you want to hide or because you hate the world or anything like that. You're walking away because you want to get closer to God, which means to get closer to reality ultimately, and away from the unreality. And the reality of living in a machine age is that almost everything is fake. Everything is bullshit, to be rude about it. And that's more and more so all the time. Now that we're in the age of deep fakes and AIs, it's not going to be very long at all before you will not be able to tell the difference between anything written by a writer like me and anything written by a machine. You will not be able to tell the difference between art created by a human and art created by a mechanism, by a series of algorithms and numbers. You will not be able to tell the difference between a film like this that somebody's actually sat down and made in a garden and a piece of deep fakery. And this is just the beginning. This sort of stuff will look crude in 5 years' time. So not only are we flooded with content, endless content as a result of the writing revolution and the digital revolution, but we're flooded with fake nonsense. The world is driving us mad. I think Seraphim Rose, the American Orthodox monk, very interesting man who undoubtedly I will write about one day. Seraphim Rose once said that in the end times, the sufferings of the Christian martyrs, and actually just the sufferings of all human beings, I think, will not be the physical sufferings of, say, martyrs in the Roman arena, or people being eaten by lions or turned into human candles by Emperor Nero. There'll be the psychological sufferings of people living in this insane machine world in which everything is fake and nobody can tell what is real. And this kind of torture is every bit as real in many ways as physical torture. Now, we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. We're getting there. So I think that when I endlessly angst about whether I should be writing anything, and when I read poems like that, which are really about retreating, about walking away from the fakeness, this is what I'm trying to talk about. And here I am making yet more content to put on the internet about it, but I think it's an important thing to think about. And I think the reason I want to say it is that this is a conversation a lot of my readers have as well. The degree to which it is necessary or possible to retreat. And I've been, as I say, writing about this for years. I wrote a novel in 2017, I think, called Beast, long before I was a Christian or had any kind of religious affiliation. And that was a novel about a man who runs away from his family, runs onto an English moorland, lives in a ruined cottage, doesn't even really know what he's looking for. Is he looking for God? Is he looking for himself? Does he even know? He doesn't really know. And that was really a story about a hermit who had to flee the world. I was a Buddhist before I was a Christian, many years before. And in the Buddhist tradition, of course, the Buddha also retreats from the world. The Buddha is a prince, and he runs from everything, just like so many Christian saints did, just like St. Anthony did, St. Francis, so many of them. Wealthy man runs from the world and says, this is all fake. I need to look for the truth. People who are paying attention have always been able to see through the fakeness of what an Eastern Christian would call the world, or maybe what a Christian would call the world. Well, what Christ called the world, so we would all call it that. It's almost as if what is happening today in the world of the machine is lifting the veil on the fact that it's always been fake, this world. But now we can really see it, because it's literally fake. It's literally invented with the deep fakes and the AIs and the rest of it. There's no possibility of looking out at the world today and seeing it as anything but fake. I've been paying attention, against my better judgment, to the election campaign that's going on in Britain at the moment. And of course soon there'll be one in the United States as well. The United States elections are the peak of human fakery, but the British aren't far behind. Everybody knows what's going to happen in the British election, but we have to sit through 6 weeks of absolute nonsense and pretense. People painting themselves as things that they're not before we can get to the inevitable conclusion. And it's just more fakery. So how much do you have to hide from this in order to keep yourself sane and also to have any possibility at all of any kind of spiritual advancement? That's a question that haunts me now. And the answer is you do. You really do. So the question is how much you can do it and how you can do it. I was watching a video recently by one of my favourite living desert fathers, a man called Father Lazarus Al-Antony. And if you haven't come across Father Lazarus, speaking of content, it's about the only content worth watching on YouTube. Well, some of it anyway. I'll put a little link to it beneath this film. Father Lazarus is an Australian man, former Marxist university academic, who I think probably in his 40s left the world and fled to a monastery, initially in Serbia and then in Egypt. Now he's a member of the Coptic Church. He lives in a cave very near where St. Anthony used to live in the Egyptian desert. And if you want to see what the life of a desert father is like and how these people are actually real even now, and it's not just something I write about from 2,000 years ago, you should watch these little films that have been made of just interviews with Father Lazarus. He's a very profound man, very funny man too. And there was one particular film I was watching. There's a whole series of them. And he's asked this question about how to cope with the world. And he says, a lot of people say that it's possible to be a monk in the world, and I can only assume that those people haven't tried it because it's impossible. And he says, honestly, if you want to be a Christian today, if you want to advance in your prayer life, if you want to have any possibility of living like a Christian, he says, his advice is that you should insulate yourself from the world as much as possible. And this is advice to people living in the world. Most of us aren't going to be living in caves anytime soon. But he says the thing you need to do is just cut yourself off from as much of it as you can, because it's designed to drive you mad. And the reason monks go and live in caves, do pursue this kind of extreme behaviour, and not, as I say, just in the Christian tradition, is that they know they have to remove themselves from the fakeness and the insanity in order to have any kind of connection with God, in order to see what reality is. Because if we assume that the world we're living in is entirely fake, we've created this fake world based on our passions and our nonsense, and the technology we have just amplifies the fakeness, amplifies the shallow layer on the surface. Then if we want to get down below that, which is where God lives, which is where reality is, the reality of ourselves, and not the fake picture that we create of our personalities, the reality, then we have to strip away all of this stuff. We have to hide from the nonsense that's pumped into our heads 24 hours a day, which of course is harder now than it was for the Desert Fathers, because they didn't have to deal with the internet and digital TV and smartphones and all the usual rubbish that we have now that pursues us and follows us around. If you have a phone in your pocket, it doesn't matter how far you go, you're always on. So that's Father Lazarus's advice. You have to insulate yourself as much as possible from this. And I thought about this when I was watching the British election campaign. I was talking to somebody recently who's a well-known Orthodox writer, and she was saying to me years ago she gave up having any connection with the news, any connection with politics, any connection with that stuff. She used to write about it and write columns, as I have done. And she just stopped one day, and she said her prayer life advanced enormously when she did that. And it's interesting to me because I stopped writing for a year for precisely that purpose after I wrote Savage Gods. And I keep coming back to the reality that I used to be somebody obsessed with politics and culture. Even until quite recently, I would write about that stuff quite a lot. And now I find I just can't. Often I'll read the news and I'll have an opinion about something, and I'll sit at my keyboard and I'll think, right, I've got to write about this. I can't. Something stops me. Something physically stops me. I can't do it. Which is why I end up writing about saints and wells. Something is stopping me, or someone is stopping me from going there. And I think when you get a call like that, you should probably pay attention to it and not try and resist it. So coming to the inescapable conclusion that one of the things I have to do if I want to follow Father Lazarus's advice is I need to stop reading the news. I need to stop engaging with it at all. I need to turn it off and probably not go back to it. Which is a shame, because I quite like to watch the election results. And Trump versus Biden's going to be fun. In a kind of watching a car crash sort of a way. But this is the reality of it. I think if we want to live, if a small part of us wants to be a desert father or a desert mother in the world, and I think there's a necessity for that, if we want to get to reality, if we want to reach God, if we want to spiritually advance ourselves, and that's about the only thing I want to do now. We have to switch it off. We have to switch ourselves off from the machine. And in my case, the thing will be different that everybody has to do. We're all different people, and there's only a degree to which we can do it. I have to, as the Nicholas Samaras poem has it, I have to, leave my suitcase behind, leave my father's suitcase behind, leave my nationality behind, leave my worldly belongings behind, and cross the border into the new country. And I think I'm going to have to just stop watching the news forever and see what happens, which is a traumatic notion. And I think maybe it's a useful thing to think about. Maybe that's why I made this little film, apart from the reality of wanting to test out my funky new camera, that I wanted just to say in response to what a lot of readers say to me. Often people will say, why do you keep writing about these people? We can't live in the desert. We don't have to do that. And I think, yeah, we do, actually. We do have to live in the desert. Not literally for the vast majority of us, but inside in some way, we have to walk into the desert. We have to leave behind whatever it is that's tying us to this monstrosity of a machine, this demonic thing we've created, which is designed to distract us from truth, designed to take us away from reality. Actually, we have to walk away from it. And probably how we do it is different for each of us. As I say in my case, I probably have to stop watching the news, stop engaging in current affairs, stop doing whatever it is that turns my head into a kind of whirlwind of nonsense. That's my path. But what's yours? What's the path all of us have to walk into the desert? So I think that's probably what I wanted to say. That's probably why I set my little camera up in the garden. So there it is. Summer solstice in 1 day's time. As I record this, it may have passed by the time I post it, so I hope that the turning of the year is good for you.